Hey everyone, Hybrid Toy Reviews here. Welcome to Topical Tuesday. Sorry I missed last week. It was a busy week, but the week before I had a suggestion in the comments from Philip Cozzolina. At Hybrid Toy Reviews, next week you should do an articulation and aesthetic comparison between the Black Series double-jointed arms and legs versus newer Pinless single-jointed and render a ruling. Philip, that is an excellent topic and one that I'm happy to talk about, so I'm bringing in the Hybrid Toy Reviews official video notepad to stick behind. Now I drew out a little chart, articulation and aesthetic, single, double, so that should be pretty straightforward. And Philip's articulation versus aesthetic versus articulation. So we're going to set that in the background here. We have the superior Sharpie S-Gel pen to write our ruling on the pad. And so I figured let's try and keep this as scientific as I can. So I brought in, because two different characters that have, one as single and one as double, due to sculpt by being different characters, could have different ranges in general. So I elected to do the original trilogy Stormtrooper, and don't go all 501st on me and say, oh, those are two different movie Stormtroopers. I get that, but sometimes a white Stormtrooper is just a white Stormtrooper. Same with the Clone Troopers. Now, we don't yet technically have a new body 501st, but I figure a 332nd is close enough since they are, or were at one point, 501st clones. So ultimately, that's just a old clone and a new clone and an old Stormtrooper and a new Stormtrooper. So that's what we're going to be working with. So first off, let's just bring up articulation. I will say sometimes the double jointed had high range and sometimes it had low range, whereas the single jointed elbows and knees have had a pretty unanimous, they pretty much all stop at 90. So, with very few exceptions. So it's more standardized. So just let's run through our Stormtroopers real quick. Just to show the range on a modern Stormtrooper, you see the elbow actually goes pretty far past 90. And bring in the double jointed Stormtrooper. The new one, they're very close. The new one might have just a little bit more range. And a big difference too, and we'll get to the aesthetics later on, but they have the same range without the pinholes on the sides. So that's kind of a selling point. Now, I will say on the legs, it has the double jointed knees, and the Stormtrooper can kick his own backside. By comparison, like I said, a lot of the single joint have 90 or just barely better. So you do definitely get some more range at the knee on the single jointed. However, the single jointed also has the benefit of having a swivel at the joint, whereas the double jointed doesn't have that swivel. If you want to turn the leg at all, you have to use that thigh joint. And because he has that upper thigh armor, that can get in the way of really turning it too terribly far. So I will say that while the Stormtrooper, the original Stormtrooper, does get more range, the ability to kick one's own backside doesn't necessarily offer a huge amount of value, but it does get more range at the knee, while slightly less at the elbow. Now, the original Clone Trooper body was a bit of a nightmare. So even though he has these double-jointed elbows that look like they should get all sorts of range, there he is, snap at 90. There we go, the classic Stormtrooper falls, another fault of that figure. Whereas, it should have fallen that time as hard as I just hit the table. These single-jointed elbows on the new clones, they get a little past 90, so there is a better range there. And then the original clone body has double-jointed knees that can go just past 90, and looking at the new clone body, it pretty well matches at the knee. You're not getting anything, better or worse, I would say, on that range for the knee. That range at the elbow is a good bit more. And then also, as mentioned, if you want to turn these joints, you have to turn the bicep or the upper thigh rotation. Whereas on these single joints, you get to articulate and then rotate on both of these joints. That's actually very useful on the elbows for gun posing. Whereas on this guy, you would have to bend it and then rotate the entire arm and hope that you had the range to do it. See, sometimes you would turn it, now that bicep's kind of hitting the armpit of the armor, then it kind of wants to pop out if you keep going more. There's pros and cons. The original range wasn't bad for the time, but I think it's hard to say that it was necessarily better. So these single jointed elbows and knees also kind of are double in a sort of way because of that swivel. So I'm kind of just doing this off rip. We're not scripted, but as far as articulation, I'm kind of leaning towards the single. I'm going to be straight up. Stormtrooper knee got further range, but I kind of find there's value in that rotation at the knee and elbow. I'm going to go with single, but I will say the articulation could be argued as being almost a tie. I'm kind of just favoring that single a little bit more. Now, as far as the aesthetic, I touched on that earlier on about the Stormtrooper. He's got these big pins on his elbow there and on the sides of his leg, and that's just not film accurate. That was just something that you had to accept as a part of, being an action figure. You don't have to accept that with the single jointed, though. It's just not there. You don't have to worry about the pins. They're labeled as a pinless system, if you will. And man, I don't miss that balancing act for the old Stormtrooper. But yeah, there's just the new one is definitely more aesthetically pleasing. And just to look at the aesthetics on the Clone Trooper, sometimes they would get pretty good. They do like the black pins there, so they don't stand out as much, but they're still there. There, the white pins interrupt the blue stripes. That's a little bit more egregious, but you don't have to worry about that on the new clones. It's just seamless. There's no pins. It just looks good. I gotta say, as far as aesthetics, there's really no argument to be made. The single jointed one gets the point there. And then, actually, and I was kind of on the fence about it in the beginning. As is, the points are winning in the single joint one. But if I had to do a personal opinion, if I had to give you my personal thoughts, I think the single jointed is the way to go. I've had a lot more fun articulating figures with the single jointed joints. As I mentioned, the system is very uniform. They always get 90 degrees or maybe just a smidge better. There's not a huge, variation. Sometimes you get a double jointed figure that, would articulate surprisingly well, but not always. Whereas the single jointed ones, you just know, hey, I'm going to get 90 or a little bit better. You kind of know what you're getting right off rip. So as a personal aesthetic, or as a personal opinion, I think the articulation aesthetic should go to single, which is kind of how the argument broke down anyway. So I guess I can say I'm right. So Philip, thanks for suggesting this Topical Tuesday idea. People in the comments, what do you think? Where do you stand on this? I think the single joint system is the way to go, the pinless system. I think it's just the best way for the line to go. They look a lot better. They articulate in a standard, really positive way. I've got no gripes. And also, if you have any ideas in the description below, fire off. If you have Topical Tuesday topics, I will say next week goes to Phase 2 Action Review, where he wanted me to just talk about where I like to shop for my figures, both brick and mortar and online. So that'll be a fun video to make. And so keep an eye out for that one next week. Thanks, Philip, for this suggestion. Thanks, Phase 2, for next week's suggestion. And fire off in the comments. What do you think I should do? So I'll see you next week on Topical Tuesday. Until then, have a good one. Bye.